The topic that I was asked to talk about today is poisonous plants or gardens, and so we'll crack in and give that a go. So it's quite a big topic. I thought the way that I'd approach it is to talk about why plants and fungi are poisonous very briefly, and then run through the top 15 poisonous plants, and then have a wee talk about poisonous fungi to finish the talk off. So you consider why plants are poisonous. Plants and fungi produce a range of chemicals, and it's designed to give them a competitive advantage. So they certainly don't have poisons directed at killing people. That's just a happy accident, I suppose. So there's numerous poisonous plants out and about, both native and exotic, both breeding and cultivated. And so to try and condense the subject down into something more manageable, what I thought I'd do is run through the top 15 poisonous plants that have been reported to the New Zealand National Poison Centre. So that's kind of the criteria I thought that I'd use. And it's important to note that of these species, it's not about them being the most poisonous. These are the ones that have had the greatest number of inquiries to the National Poison Centre. So that is an important distinction. It means that I will exclude things like Corynocarpus arborea too, which has had some quite interesting and really spectacular poisonings since 2008. I think there's been about 4. And rather than running through the list directly, I'll group them together by family. So those 3 belong to the Colocasia family, and Agapanthus and Daffodils belong to the Zantedeschia. So it makes good sense, rather than to go through from top to bottom, to group some things together. So the first one up on the list belongs to the Solanaceae family, which is a pretty large family as plant families go, and it's called the nightshade and potato family, reflecting that some of its members are poisonous like nightshade, and others in it, like the potato family, alludes to others being edible. So there's a bit of a mixture. And if we think about the humble spud, all of the green parts, including the tubers left out in the sun, of course the green bits you can't eat because they too are poisonous. So even within a single plant you get edible and poisonous. And I guess over the centuries and thousands of years, humans have been very good at trying to distinguish what can be eaten, and sometimes with sad results as well. So nigrum, Solanum nigrum, black nightshade, black and nigrum mean the same thing, coloured berries. That's a pretty common garden plant that most of us will know quite well. It's distributed throughout New Zealand. As I said, it's number 1 on the list of inquiries. Not the same as deadly nightshade, which is actually very rare in New Zealand. There's only a few single reports around Christchurch of that one. So some people who might think deadly nightshade is an issue in New Zealand, no, it's a very rare species. And that's what it looks like, with the berries being arguably attractive to little kiddies perhaps. And this set of photos is from a good friend and colleague of mine, Trevor James, who's the author of Common Weeds in New Zealand. He's a bit of a genius with the camera, I could say. So the second family is the Conicaceae family. One of the most poisonous families out there. So virtually all of its members are toxic in different ways. But having said that, there are some economically important plants as well, such as Taro, which, if it's cooked, it's safe to eat. If it's uncooked, it's poisonous. And the one on the 15 plants list is Zantedeschia, Arum lily. Very common in paddocks and waterways in the milder regions of New Zealand. It can get to quite large numbers out in paddocks because the stock won't touch it, and those that do aren't around for very long. And of course, it's fairly common in gardens as well as a very hardy member. Like the family, all parts of it are poisonous. So we've got two forms. We've got one that's got a pure white flower. I'll use flower. And we've got the more weedy one, which is called green goddess, and that's got a combination of greenish and white flower parts. But actually, as many of you may know, that's not a single flower. What we have is a spathe, which is that white part, and then we've got the true flowers on spike. And so instead of just one flower, we've got a flower spike of many thousands of flowers. So it's quite an interesting thing to consider the botanical morphology versus what people might immediately see. And so this spathe is a bract, which is basically a modified leaf, and that's a common feature that runs through the Colocasia family. And the second member is the peace lily, which is a fairly common indoor plant. It can be grown outside in the milder areas, and that too has a type of spathe, but it's more of a hooded shape. And again, characteristic of that family, all parts of it are toxic. And I would argue that if you've got little kitties, why would you have that one as a pot plant? And I think the term peace lily provides kind of positive connotations, and it's probably quite a good marketing method. But, you know, if there's a poisoning that results from growing an indoor plant that gets eaten by a little kitty, then it's not so useful, is it? So that's a bit of looking at what the plant looks like. That lady, Jenny, she's based in Christchurch, and she's an amazing contributor to the iNaturalist platform, which is where I've got some of the images here. So I've used a combination of Trevor James's images, iNaturalist images, and some that I've taken. So it's really great to have access to that resource for these sorts of presentations. Third member of the Colocasia family is Taro, culturally quite significant, including to New Zealand Pacifica. It is grown here, but only in the milder northern regions. Again, all parts are toxic unless you cook it. That's plantation in Hawaii, so it's grown there as well. And that's a dark leaf selection from Brazil, which we also have in New Zealand, just to show a bit of the range. And again, we've got a flower spike with the wrapping around spathe, and then the other two photos show the edible parts, so the stems and the tubers. So it's an interesting one. One of the themes in this talk is that there are crops that we eat and we often don't think twice about it. Preparation is really important, and having that knowledge of where parts of plants are poisonous is super important. Okay, the next family is the Fabaceae, or in the old money it used to be called the Leguminosiae. And That's a big family, which is legumes, peas and beans, agriculturally very important. Lots of woody ornamental plants, and quite a few weeds as well, which is a recurrent theme on some of these plants. And the one we're looking at is our native Kowhai, Sophora species. We've got 8 native species, and it grows in South America and Pacific as well. And for that one, it's mostly the seeds that are poisonous and quite toxic. So if you think about Kowhai growing around the place, you find it in bitter gardens and schools, and it is quite an iconic New Zealand tree. And you might think that it's unattractive to eat, and that is very true. So I think growing it in that sort of environment, even in a kindergarten, is relatively safe because it's not an attractive thing to pop in your mouth. But having said that, just this year, I was doing some field work in Christchurch in the red zone, looking at some of the plants there, and I came across a couple of blokes who were living in their vans, and one was very spiritually connected to the land, as he was telling me, and he talked about Kowhai speaking to him, and so that conversation carried on, and I was mainly there to distract him from the other person with me doing the real work, and in the end he confessed that he'd ground up the seeds and drunk it as a tea. And so you think, well, here's a species who would eat that, but no, people actually do. And as I say, that was just this year. And yes, he did have spiritual experience. So, ready for a new family? The Euphorbia, quite a diverse group. Remember, quite a few of them toxic. Current theme here, many of them are weeds, a few of them useful. They typically have a milky sap associated with them, and that's the main toxic component. So, from the Euphorbia, there's the Euphorbia species, of course. They're a mixture of garden plants and weeds here in New Zealand, and they have the milky sap, which looks like that. And if we consider that one, very common garden weed that when you pluck them and break them in half, they start oozing. Traditionally, that has been used by some to treat warts, and it's due to that milky sap being very caustic. But I don't think it's recommended really. That one's quite a rare ornamental species. I don't know if anyone else here has grown it. I've only seen it down in Castle. I see a couple of heads nodding perhaps. That's the myrtle spurge. And that's a pretty commonly known one. That's our endemic New Zealand native species, Euphorbia glauca, glauca being blue-green, referring to the foliage colour. And that's pretty widely planted around the place. I think it's common sense that if you're weeding those sorts of things, you don't want to get the sap over you anyway, right? So people tend to wear gloves or be careful about washing their hands afterwards. Who knew that daffodils were? Yeah. So this family, the Emeraldaceae, is a range of genera, and the two that we'll talk about is Agapanthus and Narcissus, or daffodils. They do have, of course, economic importance, and they are unknown family, and shallots and all those sorts of things, garlics, leeks, and so on.
Yes. The whole of the daffodil is noxious?
All parts, but especially the bulbs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, again, relatively low risk. That list does refer to the most common inquiries rather than the deadliest ones. That would be a lovely talk for another day, I think. So Agapanthus is arguably in that family, so it depends which taxonomist and what treatment you're talking about. It's fair to say that it's probably one of the most recognised plants in New Zealand. People seem to love or loathe it in equal measure. I think trying to dig out a good clump of it would be in the later camp.
Yes.
That's some of the taller growing plants, photographed with Lincoln. And the taller plants belong to subspecies Orientalis, but there are others as well. So that's a medium-sized cultivar, photographed down Blenheim Road. And this one is the dwarf, example of the dwarf Agapanthus, which comes from subspecies minimus. And it's one that's a low seed setter, so there's been a move in the industry to go from the weedy high seed setting varieties and instead choosing no or very low seed set, and in fact the fertile ones are banned from the Auckland and Northland regions. This cultivar is called Calf. Okay, so yep, daffodils, as you say, it's the bulbs that are the most poisonous, but who could begrudge their splendour when they come up in springtime? I don't think anyone would be too concerned by some toxicity if it's managed reasonably carefully and people know about it. That's the common ones, Narcissus. That's a species Tazeta, which has been used in breeding programs, and they're photographs taken from the wild. So, yeah, even straight from the wild, it's a lovely looking plant. Okay. Iridaceae, the iris family, is the next one. And similar scenario, they are horticulturally showy, some are toxic to a degree, economically useful. Saffron, for example, is a member of the Iridaceae. And Laevigatus is our native little plant, which is a delightful thing to grow, I think. And one example from there that I want to talk about is the stinking iris. So that one is surprisingly common. It's all around Canterbury. It grows very well in understory and it will self-seed itself down. Pretty widely distributed in the country. The name foetidissima is foetid, which means smelly, and stinking iris also reflects it, it's a botanical name. And if you break the leaves and crush them, you will smell that pungent smell. That's what it looks like. You could see that the fruit look a little bit like Jaffa lollies, which of course aren't made anymore. And so that little kids could be tempted to pop those in their mouth, but yeah, it's not a good idea. This family, Polygoniaceae, is the knotweed family, so that is characterised by some pretty nasty weeds, Fallopian and Renatria, depending again on which taxonomy you're following, is the knotweed, and that is quite a major one in New Zealand, but also overseas. That one's characterised by having some mild toxicity. Another member is Nerium, which is the native, and its common name is wirevine. But although it's a native, it's one of the weediest natives you can have, so it will pretty soon take over some areas. Rhubarb. I think most of us were raised to say, do not eat those leaves. I do wonder perhaps about newer generations who don't know it so well, and may grow it and think, oh yeah, I know about rhubarb and how to cook the stems, but if they included any of the leaves or tried to eat that, that is quite toxic. So I think that's another great example actually of plant that we eat and enjoy and we take for granted, but it does have other parts of it as being poisonous. So again, having that knowledge is really important. And a couple of Trevor James's images of it just to remind us what rhubarb looks like. Okay, the dogbane family, the Eccocyaneaceae, widespread toxicity, horticultural shrubs, there are medicinal uses. I'm not going to read all the properties of the poisons down as I go for two reasons. It will take too long, and I've forgotten my reading glasses.
The real reason.
The truth comes out. So the species I want to talk about is Oleander. Does anyone grow that? Yeah, a couple. Yeah. So the distribution map shows that it's mostly North Island. I think it's slightly frost tender, but it's certainly around the Auckland region that I've seen most of it.
One I've discovered in the middle of Lincoln, and the shop next door said she saw children. She knew it was toxic. She saw children picking the pretty flowers, and she wanted to alert someone to that. And I went to the owner, and he since dispensed with that tree. He'd grown to a tall tree, so it's coping with Lincoln conditions.
Yep. So as the note says, it's true. All parts of it are highly toxic, and actually, when you even if you incinerate it, the smoke is highly toxic too. So I wouldn't have thought about that until I read up about it. So just to show what it looks like. Definitely a very pretty plant. That's a couple of flower photos showing the variation in flower colour. But probably not widely known that it is highly toxic. I certainly wouldn't have known it a few years ago. You just assume it's, say, one of those colourful ornamental things that we love to grow. Yeah. Okay, we're on to carrots. So the Apiaceae, or umbelliferae, to use its old name. Umbelliferae refers to an umbel, which is that type of inflorescence, the way the flowers are arranged. Again, many members are toxic. There are useful species in there, carrots, for example, right? But the real nasty, which I think we all know of as well, is Hemlock. And that has been used for executing prisoners in Greece. Yes. So there is a very, very long tradition of that European species in poisoning, whether it's accidental or deliberate. And that's characterised in several ways. When you walk past a field with them, you immediately get that stench. And if you walk past them on a hot summer day, when all the fumes are coming out, it's actually one of those smells that really sticks with you in memory. And often those smells are there to indicate that things can be poisonous. And of course, it's characterised by having the purple blotches up the stem. So that is a good way of telling it from some of those other things that are quite similar. So I think I'll move next on to a really small family, and it's a native. It's the Karaka family. It's in its own family, it's quite an isolated family. It's only got a few species that we've got Karaka, which is Conicarpus laevigatus in New Zealand, and there's a few Pacific ones, and there's two subspecies in Australia as well. The New Zealand one has the biggest fruit. We always have to be careful when I talk about the term fruit, right? Because there is the connotation fruit eating, right? And so when I'm talking about fruit and the poisonous plants talk, I'm talking about the botanical term and not the edible kind. So, Karaka is the North Island species pretty much. It's more coastal, warm climate. It was spread south by the Maori, so its southern limits are pretty much on Banks Peninsula. It can be grown elsewhere, of course. Yeah, it has been spread from its earlier natural distribution to other parts of the country where the Maori could grow and use it. So Karaka is a really interesting one, I think, because you can eat the fruit, but the kernel is deadly poisonous. The Maori traditionally processed it, and I think it's quite remarkable how they did that, because there must have been a lot of trial and error and a lot of deaths as a result over the centuries and even in more recent history. But of course, when they arrived in Aotearoa, there wasn't a lot of other fruit type things to eat. So, in some ways they had to develop methods of detoxifying things. And it is quite an elaborate method that they used. So, although it's true you can eat the fruit itself, if you get any component of that inside kernel and ingest that, you are in for a very rough time. And so this is the consequence of not preparing it properly. To eat the kernels, you would have to flush it in a stream for a long time and then dry it and get it just right. And if you didn't, you would get a big dose of the poison, and the convulsions were so bad that you would dislocate shoulders and you'd be writhing around in complete agony. And the treatment was to wrap the person in a shroud and bury them right up to their neck so that their muscle convulsions wouldn't cause dislocation, but very, very painful. So, yeah, you don't want to get that wrong. I was talking to a guy at work, Hone, who he has said that he has eaten the Karaka fruit and they have treated it in a traditional way. And then he said, but it's a dying practice. I didn't say anything. But it is true that it's quite seldom eaten these days because of the risk.
Do you even know what it tastes like?
I'm not even going there.
But you mean I can try it myself?
No. There's a couple of examples of the tree. So that's the variegated one that on the side taken from Christchurch Botanic Gardens, and that one was a pretty scruffy looking one, not too happy growing out in the wild on Banks Peninsula on Raupo Bay. But there are thickets of it as well. And actually, when the Maori distributed it around the country, some of those remnants are still there, because what you get is the original trees died out, and then you get a big, big ring of seedlings that have fallen around the original huge tree. So it's a real characteristic if you go to places like Nakinaki and some of those other old sites where it was originally spread around and grown.
So we're pretty spread.
I think the Kiruru, a bush pigeon, may be able to get it down them, but it would be a pretty big ask. I think nowadays a lot of dispersal is just local around the immediate tree, but it does beg the question, is it, being quite a large fruit for a New Zealand native, what were the dispersers? I'm not 100% sure. I think bush pigeons at a pinch. Maybe more. And yep, small and inconspicuous yellowish white flowers, and then those rather attractive looking fruit. So So the Colocasia, the nettle family, very famous for stinging nettle, of course. It is possible to eat the European, the weedy nettle, if it's really young, and a lot of people do, the greens. But the really nasty one, of course, is our native Ongaonga, Vertica ferox. Ferox being ferocious, technically that's what the word means. And it's also called tree nettle, but Ongaonga is by far the best common name, which in Maori is ouch. And there has been a recorded death from this plant where a soldier, I think he was doing his basic training, he fell into a bush of it, he got anaphylaxis and he died. So, there has been a fatality with Ongaonga. And if you ever do any bush walks, that's one of the first lessons you learn, because if it brushes past your ankles, it's one of those that avoid from then on. So, what are the signs on that? So the whole plant is basically completely festooned. And quite a bit of it on being natural, actually. Yeah. This is the Plantagenaceae family, and mild toxicity in some species. However, foxglove is highly toxic, and I think that's pretty well known, actually. There are some poisonous plants that are universally known. Digitalis purpurea, naturalised throughout the country. All parts are highly toxic, and you don't want to ingest that, or you get heart issues and potentially heart failure as well. But by the same token, they have extracted related drugs that are useful as well, and that is another aspect, of course. Some things in small and controlled doses can be medicinally beneficial, but other doses it's a very different story. With the flowers from various kernels. Beautiful looking plant, pops up everywhere by its own accord, but yes, it's one you don't want to ingest. So I think that's a pretty quick run through. Needless to say that there are lots of others. There's both poisonous and exotic plants. Poro, which was another Solanum native plant, is again toxic if you eat the green bits. So that includes the green fruit and the maturing fruit. You might get away with it if you get the fully mature orange fruit, but anything yellowy orange, don't want to go there. And there are others as well. As I said at the start, tutu, Corynocarpus arborea, is really toxic, and so much so that the bees that harvest the honeydew from the insects on it, thrips that exudate the honeydew, the bees will harvest that, make a honey out of it, and then you get a poisonous batch that makes a lot of people sick. And there have been some high-profile cases of tourists going for a bushwalk and seeing the plant and thinking that they recognise it as something edible, cooking it up as a brew, and then going into intensive care over it. Also, the berries, they are quite sweet. They taste a bit like a blueberry, apparently. 3 French visitors, a guy and 2 girls, went into the Kahurangi in the Nelson area, saw the plant, gingerly tasted one of those petals, which was sweet, tasted like a blueberry, and they ate several hundred of them. Survived, but they spent a very unhappy night in hospital and memory damage and all sorts. So, all species of Daphne, if we look at the exotics, all species of rhododendron are toxic. We've got hellebores, holly, ivies, pepper tree, poppies, and tulips.
Why are the garden centres allowed to sell the peace lily if it is toxic?
It's a very good question, isn't it? I guess it's about managing risk. I would like to see a cautionary on it though, because if it's up there in that top 15 list, little kitties are popping bits in their mouth as they tend to do.
I was hoping that, in view of all this terrible effect it can have on people, I assume that somewhere like the A&E department at hospital would have a list of all these things, because people could be admitted and they wouldn't know that they'd been in contact with.
Yeah. So the advice there is to, if you think someone or yourself might have been poisoned, you take a sample of that plant, call 111 straight away and call the National Poison Centre, and they can give you the right advice, but if in doubt, basically 111 is hospital. So, yeah, it's not something you can risk really. Yeah.
This might sound like a dumb question, but how do you find out that things are poisonous? Like, I never knew daffodils were poisonous.
Yep. So at the back of the room, I've got 2 boxes of the poisonous plants book. This one, and you're all welcome to grab a copy. I think there should be enough to go around. They've come from the Arum Herbarium, so these are out of print, but yeah, as I say, I've got a couple of boxes. And I thought I'd finish off by just having a quick talk about poisonous fungi. So the certificate there proves that fungi aren't plants. They are a different kingdom, I should say. So you've got the plant kingdom, fungi kingdom, and the animals. And so, yeah, we often do associate plants and fungi together, and they are edible for sure. Some of them not. So the number one nasty is the death cat. And yeah, I guess the clue is in the name, really, isn't it? Highly poisonous, liver and kidney failure guaranteed, well publicised poisonings, the most recent one and others in the past, high risk of the trend for foraging wild foods. If you get that one wrong, you are toast. It's responsible for 8% of world poisonings. We tend to use the term mushroom and toadstool interchangeably. Botanically, there's no difference, but culturally, we tend to use the word mushroom for things that are safe to eat and toadstools for things that we think are poisonous, with magic mushrooms not quite meeting that definition. So, 2020, like had a doctor, would you believe? She survived having bad cancer, so she was used to pretty rigorous medical intervention to save life. She harvested some mushrooms that she thought were edible, cooked them up, ate them, and nearly died as a result. And so that is our New Zealand case. And I doubt that anyone here hasn't heard about this case. Yeah, so case in point, how toxic it is. Not that widely distributed, it grows up under oak trees. There's not a lot of it in New Zealand. Don't make that mistake and don't forage things that you don't know.
Can I just ask, is that quite true to colour, that yellow effect of it?
I think it's relatively true to colour. A lot of those things have a whitish, yellowish coloration to them. Yeah, and there are lots of other native and exotic poisonous and potentially edible fungi and mushrooms around in the country, but I just thought I'd mention that bigger one. Here are some of the others. Flagrant is quite a well-known one. The magic mushrooms cause hallucination. I wouldn't recommend it. I had no personal experience with it. So just to wrap all of that up in a bow, we've got poisonous plants growing all around us. We've got them in our schoolyards. We've got them in our gardens, we've got them in our forests. Should we be worried? And as we've talked about, the answer I think is yes and no. The number of fatalities is quite rare, and there's about 75 people a year that's treated for some sort of poisonings in New Zealand. Most plants aren't actually very tempting to eat, so even the more poisonous ones aren't attractive, basically. But having said that, of course, there's a higher risk for little kiddies and those experimenting as well. So common sense goes a long, long way. Already talked about those cautionary aspects, wear gloves, keep things like that away from kids, especially if they're enticing. Don't forage, or forage only things that are sure to be safe. Don't experiment to get high.
With the age bracket, really.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Agapanthus. Is it toxic to sheep?
Sheep will eat it actually.
So they don't have any problems?
Not majorly. I think that's something that if they eat too much of it, it'll like any other animal, it starts to taste bad, they'll stop. And I think they can process it quite well, and often if the farm has Agapanthus grown, they actually have to fence it off from the sheep.
Oh, right, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Can you compost those poisonous plants?
That's a good question. I think overall, yes. Yeah. And it's a dilution effect as well. There's some of those poisonous components will rapidly break down in the soil.
Many years ago, when I was little, I had an uncle that used to forage, and he always said that if you found mushrooms and you could peel them, they were okay to eat, and if you couldn't peel them, they were poisonous. Is there any truth in that?
Pretty sure it's enough.
Yeah.
Because I can't think of any botanical distinction between the two types.
Right.
So edible fungi haven't evolved to have nice peeling tops, right?
Oh no, it's absolutely fascinating and very informative, so thank you. Well, I'm sure that most of us have either had or have had hunting plants in our garden. And I remember we had for the house we had a deck built on, and the builder suggested, right, it's a bit here, it's a nice warm place, just soften the edge. I suggest you put an oleander in here because it should be attractive and it's sheltered here. And my aunt came round, she was absolutely horrified. So it's great to have a talk club to become informed. And also thank you very much for the generous donation of all those books for us. So thank you very much.